was always a marginal student, but when I almost failed out of high school, I realized I wasn't ready to go to college. So I did something I swore I'd never do. I enlisted in the U.S. Navy. My dad was a naval officer, and he pushed me towards something called the Navy Sea College Program. It came with a $20,000 kicker that could be used towards college after just 2 years of active duty. If this sounds like a seasoning program for the wayward sons of naval officers, consider this. My dad worked in the Pentagon and played poker with the Secretary of the Navy. I was Navy Sea College candidate number 1. I'm pretty sure my dad invented the whole thing, which he denies to this day. A week after I was sworn into the Navy, I met my girlfriend, and a week later, I lost my virginity. I started to think joining the Navy was a really big mistake, a feeling that was confirmed about 10 seconds after my arrival in northeastern Illinois in the dead of winter for basic training. After boot camp, I went on to something called apprentice training, which was a school for the small percentage of sailors who were being sent straight to the fleet. Our chief petty officer in charge was a garrulous old salt who kept us in line by yelling a lot, but he was hardly ever around. The rumor was the sailor with the highest test scores would be named leading seaman and get to pick his next duty station. I was determined that would be me, so I could go back to my beautiful teenage girlfriend in Virginia, who had not yet found the time to write me, but promised to be true. They stuck us all in a stuffy classroom with a 500-page Navy training manual. The instructors shuffled through transparencies on a projector with a motor that was louder than a lawnmower. After a few days, they tested us. 50 questions, multiple choice. I aced the test, a perfect score. It was the easiest test I'd ever taken. The stuff we were learning wasn't difficult. Custodial skills for the military-industrial complex, intuitive, common sense stuff. It was a little disturbing that some of my future shipmates struggled with the material. But after the test, a big black dude named Dixon paid me a visit. We were more or less the same height, but he was much more muscular. His hands were like shovels, and his shoulders were as broad as my arm was long. He had craggy features and a dimpled chin like a cafe au lait Kirk Douglas on human growth hormone. He didn't beat around the bush. Want to make some money? Dixon wanted me to take his test for him. $20 a pop. You down? I was down. On test day, the moderators randomly circulated 3 sets of tests. Each one was marked A, B, or C, making it pretty easy to identify them. It was hardly a chief brute system. I sat behind Dixon and completed my test. When I was done, he slipped me his test under his massive arm. Most of the questions on Dixon's test were identical to my own, just in a different order. I finished his test in half the time it took to finish mine and passed it forward. When they posted the grades, Dixon and I received the 2 highest scores. I was polishing my boondockers when he told me the news. I think we should expand our operation. That got my attention. If you can do 2, you can do 3. After that, it's just copying. I didn't like the idea of doing tests for someone I didn't know, but Dixon promised he'd handle all the details. And the price was right. $20 a test, split 50-50. I told him I was in. Dixon nodded. And I get my test for free, motherfucker. Come test time, it went off without a hitch. Dixon passed the test back to me. I completed them and passed them forward again. And later that night, he handed me $100. I was saving up to buy a used car so I could visit my girlfriend from my duty station in Virginia. Dixon used his half of the money to start a slush fund, a mini loan sharking operation. He'd lend the money to shipmates that would be paid back on payday with interest, 20 for 30, 40 for 60, and so on. Dixon spread the words to his customers that he had tests for sale, and we were off and running. On test day, it seemed like half the company was in on the scam. I was even doing tests for the recruit educational petty officer, the guy who arranged the study sessions at the barracks. My association with Dixon inflated my standing in the company. I was the brains, he was the brawn. I wasn't the man per se, but I was the man who stood behind the man and whispered in his ear. It was a whole new world for me, and I loved it. Back in Virginia, I'd been a shy, bookish kid who listened to punk rock records and read comic books in the basement. A nerd. But look at me now, an associate in a criminal enterprise. As for the tens of thousands of dollars of college benefits I was putting on the line if I got caught, never crossed my mind. My popularity with Dixon and his crew didn't win me any friends among the rednecks in our company, and the worst of the lot was Feeney, a brash, shit-talking racist. Even though he was one of Dixon's customers, he taunted me by calling me homeboy. I tried not to let it bother me, but what was the point of having Dixon watch my back if I had to eat shit from Feeney? Dixon had the perfect solution. Flunk him. Really? Yeah, he owes me money. Screwing Feeney was the highlight of my time in northeastern Illinois. I didn't even look at the test. I just filled out the sheet at random, and best of all, I was being paid to screw him. As we moved into the last week before we received our orders and shipped out to the fleet, I received the letter that in my cheating heart, I'd always known was going to come. My beautiful teenage girlfriend dumped me. While I was moping around, feeling sorry for myself, rereading the letter over and over again, someone shoved me in the back. You flunked me, you asshole. Feeney. Somehow I hadn't thought this all the way through. Of course Feeney would be mad at me. And of course he'd come looking for payback. And of course he'd wait until Dixon wasn't around. You're not such a big man now, are you? It was a ridiculous question. Even though I'd gone through a pretty serious growth spurt during my short time in the Navy, I wasn't the type who got in fights. I was the type who obsessed over Star Wars action figures and played Dungeons and Dragons. Feeney sensed this about me, so he came after me. All 5.5 feet of him. Now, there are a million punk rock songs about taking all your anger and animosity and unleashing it on someone who richly deserves it. But those are songs, and this was life. As soon as Feeney took a swing at me, it was on. I grabbed Feeney and slammed him into a locker. He was surprisingly light, so I spun him around and slammed him into another locker. It made a satisfying racket like a pair of Geo Metros colliding. I bounced Feeney off the locker some more and he squirmed out of my grasp, put his head down and rushed me, which was a very dumb thing to do. I put him in a headlock and bashed his stupid head into a locker until he got away again. Sensing that this was his last opportunity, he ran up on me and kicked me in the shin. And it really fucking hurt. I hauled off and decked Feeney just as Chief Petty Officer in Charge came around the corner. He looked down at Feeney. He looked up at me. I want you in my office now. While Chief dealt with Feeney, I went to the office and sweated out. I'd blown it. Big time. There was no way they were going to let me be leading seaman now. Goodbye, Virginia. Goodbye, teenage girlfriend. Chief came in and shut the door. You must think you've got everyone fooled. This wasn't about the fight anymore. He knew. He knew about the cheating. He knew about the scam. He knew everything. I was going to be kicked out of the Navy Sea college program. I'd be an embarrassment to my father, a disgrace to the family. Chief looked at me and said, "You want to tell me why there's a TV crew from Navy News here to see you?" What? During my last conversation with my dad, I'd bragged about my test scores, told him about being named leading seaman. He must have pulled some strings, sent word up the ladder that Navy Sea College candidate number 1 was making shit happen. And if I looked good, the chief looked good. My dad looked good. The Secretary of the Navy looked good. This was how the Navy operated. I went on TV, and when Dixon and his crew came back to the barracks, I was a hero. As for getting to pick my duty station, that was a bunch of bullshit too. The Navy was never going to let me choose where I wanted to go. That was their scam. Instead of sending me back to Virginia, the Navy sent me here to San Diego. And I promise you, I'm telling you the truth when I say this sailor is here to stay.